Welcome everyone to the June 17th Police and Fire Commission. I'd like to extend my appreciation for all of those who've been able to accommodate our meetings the last several months, doing them via computer and Zoom. It is nice to see everybody actually in person, and of course we'll want to make sure we keep our social distance and practice good safety measures. With that, I'd like to call the meeting to order, and we have a full quorum. The second item of business is approval of minutes. Has everyone had a chance to look at them? Is there a motion?
I move.
Okay, it's moved. Second? Okay, second, yeah. Any discussion or corrections? If not, all those in favor of passage of minutes signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Third item is I wanted to, and I'll pass these out. I wanted, in light of everything that's going on, across the nation and whatnot, I wanted to make a statement, just as it relates to the Police and Fire Commission. 2 weeks ago, I called the chief, and I wanted to thank him for his letter, on our Fitchburg community in response to the George Floyd murder in Minnesota. I also called the chief to not only reinforce what he had said in his letters, but also raise concerns as how it's going to apply to us in the Police and Fire Commission as it relates to, law enforcement, complaints, hiring, all the things that we're involved with, retention. And we want to make sure that we're meeting our mutual objectives. Clearly, all that's going on with the pandemic, the much realization that there's been systematic racism in our country. We want to make sure that people understand that there is a justified reaction to the pain and anger, resentment that some people, particularly in the black community, are feeling, and the distrust that comes with it. Clearly, we need to make changes. We can't move forward with just the status quo. Reactions on what need to be done have been varied. Some people have called for defunding the police, others not. Some say better hiring and training of officers. It was interesting in this morning's Cap Times, if you may have seen it, there was an article there from Bill Reuters, who's a member of the, he's a journalist, who called for actually elimination of the Police and Fire Commission in Madison. And it was because it was a failure to follow up on complaints, was essentially his words there. The thing is that's at the heart of all these issues to me is the lack of good governance, where accountability, transparency, participation, and responsiveness is understood by both the community and those in government. Several years ago, when the PFC asked the Fitchburg community, when we were recruiting for the chief, what was the most important thing that they saw, and the community, city employees, and the officers themselves said they wanted accountability. And I really appreciate the fact that I think the chief has done a good job on being accountable and trying to raise that level, but we're going to have to continue to raise that higher. There are things that we can do to, I think, help satisfy citizens that, hey, we are listening, we are responsive, the measures that will help in that place. So I see accountability and transparency as an issue that's really going to, be at the forefront, nationwide, the state, and here. So, I think we want to be the best Police and Fire Commission we can be. We want to be able to make sure that we have the most transparent systems and accountable systems, and we work to improve on those. Obviously, we're probably not going to get to that until we're done with our rules, but hopefully that'll be soon. But I think we'll work with the chief, we'll work with the community, we'll work with our elected officials. Most importantly, we'll also involve the community, because I think that's how we'll get to the best systems we can. So that was kind of my short statement, but I wanted to, at least affirm that I think people realize that, Black Lives Matter is important to support. I think it's important to do what we can to, make the changes that are necessary. So that's all. It was not about, Chief?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think that's important to note, and obviously this board, this commission, needs to maintain its conscientious objection. I mean, that you are citizen oversight. to both police and fire, to public safety. When there are concerns in the community, it comes before this commission. So I appreciate the fact that you can't necessarily make comment on the professionalism of the service that is provided in the city of Fitchburg. One of the things that I appreciated most coming into this community, not having spent my entire career here, is the fact that we had a progressive police and fire department, one that had good standing in the community, one that worked well with its elected officials. For that, I appreciate the concern that is out there in the community, and I would also express those that have any questions to actually come into their public safety departments to ask the questions that they're looking for, because we have a very professional police department that goes out of its way in many situations to avoid conflict instead of create it. So I know that Chief Brecklin is professional enough to not speak on his own behalf, but as the fire chief, I can tell you that my experience with this police department has basically reinforced my initial impression. So I'll just leave that at where it is. And I appreciate the work that you are doing on the civilian and the community level.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Any other thoughts or comments, Chief Brecklin?
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Tom, for your comments there. Joe, as well, I'd like to thank you for your comments. And while I've done it publicly already, I will do it again for this body. I do publicly condone the actions of the Minneapolis police officers that led to the death of George Floyd. And it's clear that those actions and inactions do not reflect the values of our community, nor do they reflect the values of this police department as I strive for them to be. And we've got a lot of work ahead of us now. Not that we didn't have a lot of work ahead of us before, but the work has certainly become even more monumental to basically try to rebuild all of the relationships and trust that we had worked so diligently to establish over time. Basically, that has been completely unraveled in the last 3 weeks. And that's going to be a tall task for us. And we're going to need, obviously, to come to the table and listen and have difficult conversations with members of our community. And I ask that, obviously, members of our community are willing to come to the table and have a conversation with our department and learn about how we police. And really help us get better, because there's always room for improvement in every situation, and we are no different. We are human beings attempting to do a very challenging job, and we are going to make mistakes, and there are certainly going to be ways that we can do things in an improved fashion, and we're willing to have those conversations and seek that opportunity out where we can get better. So I would look for additional opportunities for folks to ultimately share that information. One early opportunity is we are taking a look at our use of force policy. Understand it's not the purview of this body. I will at least publicly state it that our policy is in decent shape as it stands right now when you look at it in comparison to the 8 Can't Wait campaign. We have 6 of the 8 components already adopted by policy, and 2 others are contained but need to be strengthened from a language perspective. So we are committed to reevaluating that policy, and there will be obviously an opportunity for the public to provide input on that policy as well. And as we have done over many years, we're going to continue to train that the value of our communication skills and our de-escalation tactics and utilizing time and distance when appropriate and available are the best ways to try to achieve a safe and successful outcome in any situation. So if anybody has any questions right now, I'm certainly available for that. And if you want to talk after the meeting or at any time.
Well, again, I'd like to thank you. I think you said condemn their actions, just to make sure it was clear. I wasn't sure if my hearing was right or not. I think it was, as you said in your letter to the community, it was just a belief. As been an officer myself, 26 years, a dad instructor, I'm like, oh my God, what are these people doing? So, well, thanks. Anyone else? If not, we'll go to item number 4, which is public appearances on non-agenda items, and we did get a slip. People can't see me smiling right now, I guess, but I'd like to call up Aaron Richardson, and he wishes to speak. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. And as well, just the recent events, not just in Minnesota with George Floyd, but there's been a number of other events throughout the country. It's just appalling seeing some of the things that have been happening recently. And I want to just come in and, just, I guess, make myself available. If you saw my statement as well that I released to Chad Brecklin, it's unfortunate when you look at what we have done here in Fitchburg. It appears that we're ahead of the curve, and more that comes out, it seems like we're way ahead of the curve of other departments throughout the country, which is good for us, but also very sad to see. And, I think that's one of those things that all of us, and I hope all of you can join me in just holding our staff accountable to make sure that we continue to stay ahead of the curve. I feel in my heart that some of these things will not happen here in Fitchburg because of some of the training that we do and some of the policies that we have, knowing that, they can't wait is a popular thing out there right now with those 8 policies, and knowing that we have those things implemented, and there's a couple that we want to make better, but a lot of people out there, a lot of municipalities can't say that they have all those 8 things in there. And so that's just one sign that we do try to stay ahead of the curve. We do try to do what's best for our community. Because we can't have those types of things happen here in Fitchburg. They shouldn't be happening anywhere, frankly. So, just wanted to come in. If you have any ideas, suggestions, please let me know. Always open to that as well. I support our department. I think they do a great job, and I hate to see people piling on or knee-jerk reactions to some of the things happening in other parts of the country that will negatively impact our department as well. So. Hope that doesn't happen. We'll see. But, again, just continue to make sure that we as a community are holding ourselves accountable to make sure that we stay ahead of that curve. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I think that is an opportunity to work on systems that'll help, our community by involving the community, by involving the elected officials, by involving the commission, to come up with better systems to make sure we have 360 communications so that we're, having the best police and fire department we could have. So that'll be a good objective to work together on. Okay, thank you. Sir, did you wish to speak at all? No, just okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, the next item on the agenda will be report from the police department.
So I think everybody received the staffing report that was sent out in the packet. Is that correct? Just
Yes.
briefly go through that. So you can see that we currently have all positions are full in the department. We have 2 officers, well, at the time of this writing, we're at the academy, although one now is at the academy and will be completing on June 23rd. The second officer was the one that we had just hired and put on duty or on our roster on June 11th, and the academy that he was scheduled to attend on June 15th has been pushed back to July 27th. So he is doing some other learning opportunities and other work within the police department for the time being until he can go off to that academy on July 27th. Which leaves us with 2 patrol positions unfilled, obviously at this time where no one's, they're not filling those shifts. And that covers the update there. Any questions?
Questions? Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next, because you covered the new police officer update as well, let's do the report from the fire department.
You have also received our update in your packet. Staffing levels really haven't changed. There are a couple of things that you should be aware of in the realm of bringing people on staff. Our interns are going to be moving into the fire station on Father's Day. They start their work the Monday after. The other item that was addressed through the last Personnel Committee meeting is the chaplaincy program. Chaplaincy is an unpaid volunteer position. We address that in a way that contributes to overall health and fitness of our, not only our public safety staff, because the peer support is established to assist police, fire, and EMS, along with other people in the community. The benefit of having outreach and being able to assist people in their time of need suggests that you help them at their level. And one of the things that we know is that chaplaincy is of benefit to some people in the community, not all. The other thing is that we understood that we have to be very careful in what we impose. So the imposition isn't necessarily that in religion as much as assistance. We have reached out to secular and non-secular organizations to be able to provide assistance at every level as much as possible. And the posting for that position will be put out so that all people of interest can place that application, not just those that represent a certain religious community. So it just gives you an idea of some of the things that have been worked on, not only with the fire department, but with human relations, in order to address, hopefully, a longevity of employment because of the fact that we're addressing the concerns and the needs from a post-traumatic sense of our emergency responders, and also city staff and citizenry. All we need is something like a tornado to come through our community, and all of our employees, Public Works, City Hall, parks, it really doesn't matter. They're going to be working on bringing us back to a certain sense of normal. And with that, they may need the assistance. So it's not limited to police, fire, EMS. And then when somebody loses property or person, it's another avenue that we have to reach out and to provide assistance at the citizens level. So we're pretty excited about it because of the fact that it is addressing all levels of assistance, not just what we see with emergency responders.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? If not, I appreciate the fact that both our police and fire department are open to getting input from the citizens and improving the departments. Okay, the next item on the agenda will be discussion and input of the PFC rules and regulations, our update. And we'll go through. I appreciate the fact that Sarah sent out the most updated ones. It's a little bit easier to work off of those. And we'll pick up where Sarah started, which is on 4. I actually have one to go back on, but that we can do that later. So thank you. Okay, I think we're on. I have to apologize because my glasses steam up with when I have to put my glasses on. So section 5, I think is where we're at.
And I've got section 5 up here on the screen too, so if you want to follow along up there, that works as well.
Okay, do people have comments or changes on section 5?
Thank you.
Okay, if
I do have the one. I
Okay.
just want to call attention to the highlighted or bolded section there. A time frame should be specified. I think it would be important to have a time frame specified for any officer or department member wishing to appeal a decision that has been made by me to make that appeal to the Police and Fire Commission within a reasonable amount of time. Currently, there is no standard, from my understanding, for when they may have that ability to file the appeal, and I think
do we know what other municipalities use? Is it 30 days, or it'd be good to me, it would be good to find what that is.
I don't know what it is. I would suspect it's in the realm of 10 to 15 business
Okay.
days, probably.
Oh, did you have that? Okay, Rosa? put your mic on when you talk, please. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I thought I had included some of that in the draft.
Nope, we're working off of the original one, all the work that you had did.
Okay, but there is
completed.
a time that's specified, so I could go back and get that for,
That's a good comment. Let's get what I think the norm is, whether it's 10 days, 15 days.
Right.
Somewhere right, probably right in the middle works. Because you do want to be able to have somebody who they have the ability to appeal, but you don't want to have it go on forever, so. Okay, good comment. Any others on section 5? Okay. Anything on section 6 then? I have a typo, which is on 6-7, commissioners, which may be appealed, I believe, instead of appeal. Anything else under 6?
One thought on
Okay,
section
Tom?
6.2,
Okay.
there's, it references representation by a lay advocate at the hearing. And I believe, and I'm looking for it further up in section 5, at the end of section 5, just up in the middle of the page or so, there's the last sentence that says, "The respondent and the complainant may represent themselves or be represented by an attorney." And I think allowing for a lay advocate to be a representative of the person who's the accused makes sense. And it may make sense to clarify that the accused can have someone, a lay representative, other than an attorney.
To go back in 5 and do that as well?
Right.
Okay.
I think that may be beneficial.
Make them consistent? Okay. Good suggestion. Okay.
One other thought, sorry, going back to section 5.
Okay.
It's in 5.5, the second full paragraph that starts with "the commission shall." And it may be my sense of timing that's off, but the hearing has to be held, but so person files a charge. We have to wait 10 days before we can then hold the hearing after 10 days, and then we can't hold it more than 30 days after the charge is formally served. I think the language in that second sentence, where it says, if the date of filing is more than 10 days prior to the next regular commission meeting, the commission president shall call a special meeting of the commission. Should it read, if the date of filing is less than 10 days prior? Because if for instance, June 1st is the date that the charge is served. If it's, if our next meeting is on June 5th, we can't hold the hearing
Right.
yet.
Because, yeah.
So I think it should be less, but again, that's one of those.
Well, I really appreciate that. We are going to have, when we're done, the next step in the process is to actually have legal review to make sure, and maybe that's one that we'll flag to make sure that that wording is correct.
From a grammar standpoint, in that same paragraph, if you're going to spell out 30, you should spell out 10 or vice versa.
Okay.
And I did not get an A in English. That's just what I've been told.
Okay, well, thank you.
One other thought now, looking at that same paragraph, the second to last sentence says the meeting may, at the president's discretion, be conducted as an open meeting or a closed session. I believe it has to be an open meeting, so I don't think it could be a closed session at the president's discretion for the public part of the hearing. We can
Right.
certainly deliberate and make a decision in closed session.
Right. Well, that's a good comment. Thank you. Good catch.
Wait, can you say that part again, please? I'm sorry. The meeting may at the president's discretion be conducted as a, you said,
I think it has to be an open meeting.
The hearing itself has to be open.
got it, okay.
The discussion afterwards could be moved into close to go over the merit or the discussion of what has merit or what doesn't, so.
Tom, if I could, one other.
Okay, sure.
A
This is-
global thought on sections 5 and 6. So, it was in the handbook from the League of Municipalities, there's the service of the formal charge on the accused starts the hearing timelines. And there's the ability to wait to serve the charge on the accused. It may be worth formally defining when an accused is served with the charge so that there's no question of when it was served.
So they can't call that into question later?
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. So, and that may just be personal service, so you have to physically hand it to them, or someone has to hand the service to them.
Is there a current legal definition as far as the US mail or in person? Does it define what that is?
I think it varies, but we could define it however we
Okay.
wanted. In person makes sense to me, but, you know, I can understand if certified mail would be something that's of interest.
Okay. Again, that'd be one I think that we'll want to flag, you know, with the attorney in the review. Other comments, because we're rarely at section 7. And I'm glad we went through this kind of first, okay, Chief?
I don't see anywhere in here where we have anything about a complaint investigation process, and I think that that's one of the reasons why we started to review the rules and regs, is to address if a citizen is unhappy with the service that they've been provided by the fire department, that they have an outlet for that, and/or the police department, of course. So I do think that we want to take this opportunity as we look at the rules and regs to better define what that process may look like, how a complaint could be filed with the PFC, and what the process that the PFC would utilize in general terms to investigate or at least address that complaint as well.
You know, to go back, I think and I'm going to look and maybe I missed it, but I thought that what was referenced was the statutory part of it without going into detail somewhere in there. And I think that's what we'll have to look. I think you raised a good point. I don't know if we can find it right now.
Right, well, and on the website, on the Police and Fire Commission's webpage, there is an online application for complaint procedures. So it would be worth listing.
Okay, well then maybe we can just insert that. Go ahead, Tom.
Thanks. And if I could, for education for myself and maybe for others too, what is the current process? So if a resident of Fitchburg complains about a service call from the fire or police service, what's the current process and how is it currently handled? And I guess the major question of that is, do we, the Police and Fire Commission, see every one of those, or is there some kind of process internally where you decide whether or not to bring it forward to the Police and Fire Commission, charge or not a charge?
So right now, where the process would lie is the Police and Fire Commission's purview by statute is hiring, discipline, termination. So absent disciplinary action, in particular with an appeal, it wouldn't necessarily come before the PFC. What we do now is if there's a complaint filed, usually that complaint is taken by the shift sergeant, who then captures the complaint information. They'll take a look at what the facts are presented by the complainant. They'll talk to the officers that are involved. They'll review any body camera or squad video that might be available if there's witnesses and those sorts of things, depending again on the scope of the complaint or the scope of the incident. They'll do an investigation, and if it needs higher level involvement from a member of the command staff to do the investigation because a sergeant was involved, then we obviously would do that. Typically, it's one level above where the complaint resides. We'll conduct an investigation. Once that investigation is done, I mean, if it's a complaint that says, you know, I'm not happy with how the officer disposed this case, for instance, did they have to, they didn't talk to me or get my statement, or they wrote me a ticket, or whatever the case may be, we would consider that to be more of a procedural type complaint, if you will, where again, the sergeant would look into that, they'd get the facts, they'd call back the complainant and say, this is what we found out. And ideally, that would hopefully answer their concerns or address their concerns. And then we would indicate in a summary report that we were able to mediate that complaint, or it was unfounded. They understood why we did what we did, to tie up all of that process. If it's more of a policy violation or a complaint against personnel, then again, we would still ultimately follow up with the complainant. There would clearly be a more detailed investigation, would be looking at policies that may have been violated, what's the training, that's in there. The officer would be interviewed potentially, well, they'd be offered if they wanted to have a representative present. The interview could be recorded or is likely going to be recorded and those sorts of things. So those would then come to me, obviously, for review. We would do, if there's a potential for corrective action, we would do the pre-disciplinary or predetermination meeting with the employee that's affected to get, an opportunity for them to provide any of the relevant information they would like me to consider. And then I take that information under consideration along with what the investigatory report has yielded. And we determine what the outcome is based upon what the severity of the offense was there prior history, was it simply a mistake, was it malicious, have they accepted responsibility, those sorts of things. So that's kind of at least a 30,000, 40,000 foot view of how we would typically handle complaint processes. But as the PFC knows, when I talk about recommendations for our promotion, we are tracking the complaint that, officer so-and-so, damaged my carpet while they were dusting for fingerprints. We actually have that sort of information and keep that. If somebody calls, we expect our shift sergeants to document that there was a complaint and what they did to address that. And we're fortunate, to be honest with you, most of our complaints are more of that procedural, the questions need to be better answered that maybe the officer, for whatever reason, couldn't answer or was unable to answer. And, after some time and things have maybe cooled off in a situation, the sergeant can go ahead and explain that a little bit. There's a better two-way dialogue and those sorts of things. So that's the vast majority of the complaints that we get are more of a procedural nature than they are a complaint against a person and, using force or these sorts of things.
And maybe even before Chief Pulvermacher, if I could interrupt, just to focus there. So two follow-up questions. You mentioned the summary report. Just how is that distributed? And then what other kind of, short of a public records request, how can citizens know what complaints are made?
There we go. So there's actually, if somebody calls on an inquiry on a case, we generate a written report on that. It's forwarded to command staff for review, and then we file it. And as far as, the public understanding what sorts of complaints, I think that's something we're going to be taking a look at as part of this whole potential improvement process of what data do we have available and what data can we make publicly available. And that could potentially be one of those things that ends up going more publicly available to at least indicate, hey, in 2020, we had 7 complaints against our personnel, and, 3 were for unprofessional behavior, 3 were clarifying questions on whatever, 1 was damaged my carpet or damaged property during an investigation, those sorts of things. So that's something we're definitely going to look at. As far as the record itself or that report itself, we would only release that in regards to what open records required to be released. There are obviously current protections as it relates to personnel records and those sorts of things.
So for us, when it comes to complaints and even discipline, we look to correct behavior at the lowest possible level. If behavior continues, regardless of what we have done or talked to the employee about, well, then that becomes part of the disciplinary process. And those are the types of things that you would likely see more often than the individual one-off complaint. All complaints get investigated, and then typically our personnel files are kept in human resources. So we would involve HR at that point, to the point where I don't have the reports in my office. They are kept within the personnel file, and HR is brought up to speed as far as what was done. It also gives me an opportunity to bounce things off of the professionals who are typically involved in human relations issues. So I don't try to admit to knowing Sarah's job. I mean, she does it very well, and it's in my best interest to make sure that she's involved in that process as well.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Those are good questions. I appreciate the chief. We do see the at promotions, we see, you know, they had this complaint 5 years ago and it was cleared, or they had this complaint and it was justified, this is how we resolved it. So we are seeing it, and I think the chief's comments that this is something that we could look at to potentially, you know, more transparency, accountability is something that we can do, I think, as we move forward. So it's a good comment. Any others? Okay,
Yeah.
Jim?
I was looking at the complaint form that's online, and I think we probably should have a little bit more meat on the process for the PFC, especially since, as I read this complaint form, if I didn't want to go to the police chief and file a complaint there, and if somebody spills something on my carpet, potentially that could come to us.
Right.
And so just a matter of, then what is that process? This kind of says that the PFC is going to investigate that, but I think there need to be some process that if we get a complaint that doesn't really rise to what we should be doing, that will go then back down to the chief.
I think that's a good comment. I know we've had some situations where it's like there's a complaint, but what's the proper way? And citizens do have the availability to go directly to us, but then how do we, you know, properly separate out those issues that, wait a minute, this is more administrative, whereas this, wait a minute, this is something that we need to investigate and take, you know, potential action, especially if there might be a conflict or something, so.
I think you need to look at whether it's an individual or organizational issue, and then at what level, because there is a chain of command. If it's an individual issue and it's a firefighter, well, the lieutenant should be involved in that process of investigating that. That should not necessarily be on you until it rises to the level of discipline or termination. So at that point, the PFC is absolutely involved.
And I think, Jim, your comment's well taken, so that in particular, you know, we got to make sure the citizen knows that, hey, here's your avenues. You know, it could be us, or it could be this, go to here. So we need to spell that out maybe a little more clearly.
And I think, Tom, it's in section 5.4, I think is the intent of that is to do just what you're talking about, Jim, and Tom, to make clear that it is something within our purview, within our jurisdiction as a police and fire commission to review. There may be things like I spilled on the carpet, or a police officer spilled on the carpet when they were at my house investigating, that would not rise to the level of our police and fire commission. We would still, I think, have to look at that charge if it's filed with the president of the police and fire commission, but then we could determine it's not something for us.
Right. Well, and I understand that based on you know, basically you can make determination with the full commission, or even the president can say, this is how we're going to handle this, and so. Okay,
Did you see that?
Rosa, did you have something else?
No, I'm just telling.
Okay.
I just have a question. Rosa, in some of those, and she's occupied here.
Sorry, go ahead.
In some of those other PFC rules and regulations that you looked at from other communities, or perhaps in the league guidance, was there anything related to complaint processes or roles of the PFC whenever a complaint is filed with them?
Oh, wow, I wish I could recall that far away.
You want to put your speaker on, please? It is. Thank you.
I don't recall seeing anything that specific, but like you mentioned here, we could add to section 5.4 after C, because it explains there that if someone comes to us directly, and because they don't want to go to the chiefs, we will have the responsibility to determine if that complaint is valid for us to. So we could add what Jim was saying there, that in the event that we find that the charges or the complaint lacks standing, or it's not within our jurisdiction, that then we have to send it back to the appropriate department or chiefs or whoever. That would be, I think, what we would have to add to here. I would go back and look, but I don't recall seeing anything that specific.
So I'm hearing a couple of different things. Let me just clarify. I'm hearing that, I think Jim raised a good point, which is our form we want to actually look at before we, and then we also want to add that aspect that you're talking about, Rosa, to clarify. And that may be on the form itself too, that we make, that clarified.
Right, because you brought this, I mean, he brought this up in this section, and it does say people, and you brought, people have the option to come directly to us. They might want to for whatever reason. And we would still have to do a preliminary investigation and
Right.
determine jurisdiction. And if we don't have it, then we have to do, send it to whoever needs to. And that might be what we need to also clarify here.
Okay, so that's pointing out that we've got to probably do one more
Right.
kick at the cat next meeting, when, I shouldn't use those words, kick at the cat, I apologize. It's just something, anyways, to go back to the rules, if anybody has any other comments in the rules, because we're going to have a cleaned up one that we're going to look at next, July. And I think maybe even after today, we should send something through the attorney in case there's something that, hey, we need to talk about this before. Because I think the final part of the process, once it's cleared, the attorney is to make sure that we've got input from the union, we've got input from the officers, the public, city officials, if they have an issue. Okay. Because we do want to get input on that. So I'd like to go back. One of the thoughts, especially after in light of, what happened nationwide, I thought actually in our mission statement, we could add one. You have to go to the top and see how people feel about this. I thought of adding a sentence similar to the Fitchburg PFC also works to provide levels of accountability, transparency, and the trust in the community I can't even read my own writing. Trust the community is deserving of. So part of our mission is to make sure that we can create the transparency, accountability, and trust that the community deserves. I mean, that's part of I see that as part of the mission. Is that okay to be added, or?
Could you say that again, what you would add?
I write after where it says, we serve and live, so the middle sentence. The Fitchburg PFC also works to provide levels of accountability, transparency, and trust that the community is deserving of. I probably shouldn't add in a preposition, but I'm not.
Thank you.
I mean, that can be wordsmith, I think.
Can we imply that the community is deserving of all of this? So just end it with the trust word?
Sure.
Hey, Tom, do you want me to work with Rosa and Tom on updating like the complaint process? You know how similar how we worked with Jim on the recruitment part, just so that we have something that we can all review for the next meeting?
I think that would make sense.
Is that okay?
Because one of the things, this has gotten pushed back for a number of reasons, of course, but we want to do it right, and I think that would be a good way to do it. If Rosa and Tom, if you want to comment on the words for those, and then you can, we can't do it online because it's the open meetings law issues.
Yeah, so I'll send it to Rosa first, and then I'll send it to you, Tom, so that we don't have a.
Right, and then we can make sure then at our next meeting, we have that open discussion, on approving that. But also, once you have that, if you could send it to the attorney that's reviewing this, because I'd like to make sure if there's an issue that we need to talk about before we take it out to the union, the public, or elected officials, the community, that it's pretty close to the final form.
Okay.
Okay? Any other things that people have, I had one other one. I'm sorry, I have my own. And that was based on, we did get the response from Sarah and the attorney that we do have authority over probationary on promotions, even though that may not be the city's policy, but that falls in within our policy to have. And I think the word may, I think in talking to the chief, would be good to put there. And it would make sense, at least from my perspective, to say up to a year, but it may be shortened. In other words, after 6 months, the person who's taken the promotion, probation's, can be waived, something to that effect. Chief, do you have reaction?
No, I'm comfortable if you say up to a year in May. I mean, obviously, it does come down to what the city's policy is and as I mentioned last month, what position are we filling, and are we filling it internally or externally? Obviously, our desire is always to fill internally, but if you're bringing in somebody from an external process, then I, for one, would prefer the ability to have a probationary period.
Okay.
Just for
Rosa?
clarification for me, so we're talking about probation for
Promotions.
promotions. And you mentioned external, so that threw me off a little bit. A promotion, a
Yeah,
probation for
if
promotion.
you were bringing in, like I said, we always are going to strive to do internally filled promotions, but if we had to, or for whatever reason, the city desired to do an externally filled promotion, then I think it's important to have that probationary period option. Since we don't have really any basis of work history there, it's really only reliant upon the background investigation that was done, whereas, when you're promoting internally, you have that basis of work history, having worked with somebody for an extended period of time, and you're not relying solely on a background investigation.
Give me an example, not of the chief, but which positions would you, you promote from an external?
Preferably none. In the past, it's only happened one time since I've been in this agency that we did fill a sergeant position externally due to a lack of interest internally. Wow. And that was 20 years ago, 20 years ago.
And for us, it would likely be a command staff position. We don't typically have any issue filling promoted positions on the line level. And then I guess it might be semantics, but at that point, it's really not a promotion, it's more of an appointment.
Right.
Okay. Any other comments or change?
And I just want to point out, it would be a big change just because none of our other staff have these probationary periods. I mean, the non-represented staff. So these promotions are typically represented employees moving into non-represented positions. So this would be a change from what they're used to.
And I put in an email to Sarah, I think the rest of you may have seen, there's a plus minus to this issue of having that probationary period on a promotion, because it may cause some people not to apply, knowing that, there's a chance that, they're on probation. So you have to kind of struggle the accountability issue and making sure you got somebody who's going to perform with the issue of making sure you're drawing a
So
good
I have a
pool.
question then. Do we this body would have to decide, do we want to go ahead and do that? Because we don't have that in place right now,
Correct.
right?
And I think if we put the words may, that's permissive, may decide to do that, because we are going outside, or whatever the case, the chief, pointed out that situation. That would give us that flexibility.
But then I think, okay, so then it's going to be, some people may have a probationary period and some people may not?
It's a question, from the standpoint, sometimes it's the pool, and are you going out, it was in particular, I think, looking at somebody from outside. It's going to not be the norm, but it just gives us that flexibility to have a probationary period, because we think the person's really good, or I should say the chief thinks, but there's something there, so.
Rose, I see where you're coming from. You're looking from a fairness and an equity standpoint, and that makes perfect sense to me. And I can't speak for HR in the city, but that would be my assumption as to why they eliminated the probationary periods for non-represented employees to begin with. Just by adding the language into the rules and regs to grant the PFC the ability to use that authority using the may language is just basically reserving the PFC's authority and publicly stating it in the rules and regs that you have that authority. Whether or not you elect to use it is up to this body. And if I were to come to this body and say, I need to do a lieutenant promotional process and I don't have a single qualified candidate or interested candidate within the department, ultimately it would be this body's role to approve whether or not, if I recommended a probationary period, one, I'd have to have the conversation with HR if it's a deviation from city policy and get, their approval. And two, then the second layer is obviously the PFC would have to approve that request to have a probationary period as well. So if there were, equity or fairness concerns, they could certainly be addressed at that point in time. And this isn't something that I think is absolutely critical to have, because quite honestly, I hope I'm never having to do an external promotion. And that's the ultimate goal, that all my promotions for the time that I'm in this role are coming from an internal perspective. So hopefully we never even have to cross this item. But if we do, I'm just encouraging the PFC to keep it as an option that's available. And if you don't want that, that's fine. I don't have
The
any.
problem that I'm having, it's
Put it on your mic, please.
was, yeah. The problem that I'm having is I see this not concrete. It's like, okay, so we may put someone on probation. We may, well, if there's an issue with that person and needs to be put on probation, maybe we shouldn't do it. We shouldn't have that person in that position. The probationary period is to give that person the opportunity to get more familiar with the position, improve, learn, whatever, because we all have to go through that process. If you come to us that you want to put someone on probation, I see that as there's a negative somewhere in there.
Well, and I want to just clarify one more thing. I wouldn't come to you and say, I want to put so-and-so on probation. That would be decided, I'm going on record with that, but just from a fairness perspective, that would be determined at the start of the process when the position was posted for applicants, that there is or is not a probationary period. I just want to be clear about that, it wouldn't be at the stage that, oh, by the way, we went through this process and we did a background on so-and-so and I'm going to recommend them, and I'd like you to add a probationary period. That's not how we would want to operate that, and that's not how I would conduct myself.
It was clear, at least my intent is that's how it was posted, so, because I think that's the only way to do it, is at the posting, there will be a year probation. As an example, let's say it's an outside lieutenant, it will be a year probation, which may be waived after 6 months, but that's right in the posting so that everybody knows that that's the rules.
So that, I appreciate, what Rose is saying, though, from a consistency standpoint. Do we want to do that for each and every one? For a couple of reasons. One, consistency, so everybody knows that that's the process. And then two, from a training perspective, because we do want them all to receive, if they're moving from one level to another, they should receive the same training that they would. Obviously, there's some training internally within culture and the process they don't need, but I think that it makes sense actually to have that for everybody.
I'm wondering how much of an issue it is with an at-will employee. So in a situation where you're talking about command staff, you're not talking about a represented employee. Your ability to hire and fire are going to be basically based on the merits of that individual.
We still need just cause.
Oh, absolutely, just cause and process, right? So at some point, if you've determined that this person hasn't made one mistake, but multiple, and it's had these ramifications, that would likely come before you regardless.
Okay, Tom?
And I was just going to make that point. I think even command staff, non-represented staff have just cause protections in the statute, which is fine. I do like the idea of a probationary period. I like the idea of applying it to everyone so that we don't have to pick and choose. I think it's important not only for the reasons also you said on the employee side. They want to get accustomed to the position. They want to understand the position, get used to it. But from an employer management standpoint, I think we should have the ability to try and test an employee and understand how they fit in the position as well from the employer management side.
And some of that I was trying to get at with the training perspective, because once you put them through the paces and you put them through that training, you might find out things about them, right? So having that probationary period and having a process in place would maybe be helpful.
Well, and I just want to point out one little thing, if you do get someone that gets into that command staff role and maybe they don't do well and then they have to go back to their former position, what if it's already been filled and filled by somebody external? Now you're displacing employees. So I don't know, it's another way to look at it if you do have these probationary periods, because now you've got a chain reaction when you try to put them back in their former role.
I was actually going to bring that up as well, Sarah, so I'm glad you covered that. And historically, we had some issue with that, again, back, 20 years ago, where people were being promoted to sergeant and deciding, either, A, this isn't for me, or most of the time that's how it was going, is this isn't what I thought it was. So they, at the 1 year mark, they'd walk into the chief's office at the time and say, yeah, I'd like to go back to patrol. If they were a sergeant. Well, that does create a domino effect that's going to be pretty hard to overcome. So there is that flip side, particularly on internal promotions, that somebody can, wants to exercise their option to basically self-demote. And, we would obviously try to accommodate that request, but it does put us in a bit of a challenging spot if we don't have that position left for them to fill. Now, in that example, if there was another police officer, we did another process and we promoted internally, that would then create a spot for them to go back. But it does lead to potentials for inconsistent development of your leadership team, because you put people in, they decide it's not for them, which can be beneficial in the long run. But you don't want to create a revolving door where it's, you move in and you can freely move back and so forth. I mean, we always like to have, some basis for that reason to move back,
So how is this affected by having a probationary period? Because that could happen
Yep.
at any moment with anyone.
Yeah, so for probationary periods, employees have that opportunity now to go back to their former position. So that's a part of being on probation, is that if you're promoted into a higher level position, now you get to go back to your former position if you no longer want that promoted position. So it's a right that the employee has by being on probation. So it's an additional benefit for them. One of the only benefits.
And we're talking about promotion to sergeants, lieutenants, and acting chief, and the chief,
Deputy.
deputy chief. Oh, okay.
Where, Sarah, you mentioned that I consider that bumping, the idea that if you can bump
Absolutely.
back into the position and bump someone out of your former position. Where is that policy, though? That's not the collective bargaining agreement?
We don't have that policy in our employee handbook because we don't have any probationary periods for our non-represented staff. So if we implement these probationary periods for non-represented staff, we're going to have something we'll have to put something in the employee handbook that states what happens if someone wants to go back to their former role. Maybe we don't allow the bumping and we just say probationary periods, if you don't want to be in the position any longer, now you're just out of a job. I don't think you have to mandate the bumping, but it's typical. I've never worked or seen any employers where they didn't allow for something like that, but in the government.
So just so I'm getting this correct, though, assume we don't have right now we don't have a probationary period, right? And they move into that new position, and it doesn't work out, and they want to go back. There's no avenue for them to go back now because that previous position is not safe for them.
We have demotion language in the employee handbook, so we do allow voluntary demotions, but that's only if their position or a position at the same level is vacant. So we actually had that happen recently, probably about a year ago already, and one of our lieutenants went back down to being sergeant. It just happened to be open, and it worked out well. So we have that language in the employee handbook.
So, and to kind of, I don't know if there's anyone else who wants to chime in. I mean, we're really doing this. I was kind of where Tom is. I'd like to give the manager, better control over, basically a situation where you might have somebody not performing, and that's what the probationary period is. And it was always in my, state service issue that everybody, when they got hired, it was listed, there's this probationary period, and then, it was a year, or in the case of a senior manager, it was 2 years, it could be waived to 1. It was all spelled out but there were a lot more places to potentially bump somebody to, so that's, a difference too that I see. So I know we haven't answered this question.
Well, I can offer, I mean, I've listened to the conversation here and participated, and I guess the system that we have is working, you know, so that, you know, you can certainly make the argument that if it's working at this point in time, do you need to modify it? And maybe we don't need to modify it at this point in time.
Okay? There,
That's one option.
is there a consensus on that? I mean, at this point, should we just, because we can come back and review these rules if, you know.
I think we're not ready to make a decision. That's how I feel right now. I would need to see how it's worked, you know, this is done other places, whatever. I don't have enough to say, oh, yeah, I'm glad it's working right now because we don't need a crisis.
Well,
regarding that.
what
But
I heard the chief say was, you know, maybe at this point, let's keep it the way it is, just because it hasn't been a problem, if I'm paraphrasing that right.
He is paraphrasing that, right? We don't currently have language in the rules and regs, or at least in process, based upon how we do our promotional processes. We haven't had probationary periods for quite some time. I'm trying to think, Sarah, that probably predated you in your role. You know, I'm guessing probably when the handbook was rewritten during the Act 10 process is when the probationary periods went away. I certainly can't say for certain because I don't know that, but that would be my guess. That's when the employee handbook had extensive revision. So you're talking, you know, what, 8 years ago now at this point in time, since we've had probationary periods for non-represented employees. And during that time, we haven't had any issues by not having them. So what I'm basically saying to, you know, in the long way to get there is what Tom said is, we don't have them now. I'm comfortable not putting them in the rules and regs at this point in time and just continuing with the process that we have, i.e. there are no probationary periods for non-represented police supervisors.
So if we stay with that, we're staying with status quo, which we'd be fine with, because we can if there is an issue, we can come back and change the rules so we put them in, because that is within our authority. So, I mean, that's what Sarah found out. But at this point, we'll keep it the way it is as opposed to the old rules.
Well, I just have to say something.
Okay?
Okay, I'm glad it's working. I'm not suggesting, you know, come with a drastic change. But now that we're discussing this, again, I say I don't feel that I'm ready to make a decision one way or the other at this point. So obviously, we can't change it today or tomorrow, that's for sure. And I don't know if at the end I would like it to change and have probationary periods. I'm suggesting that we, as a board, continue our discussion on this, so these rules are not finished.
One thing we could do is we could check with other cities, approximately same size as to what they have or don't have. And maybe that's something between Sarah, the chief, and I, we can check. Just from the standpoint, because there is a difference between bigger cities where you've got a lot more flexibility as to where you can put people if that doesn't work, and smaller departments, so.
And I agree with what you're saying, Tom, because the issue I'm having, as you know, Rosa and I come from large departments.
Right.
So it was always a probationary period. So hearing this about bumping and it may not be a position for the person, you know, it's kind of new to me. I'm pretty sure it's probably new to Rosa too. So I just got to wrap my head around it. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the whole issue that if the person isn't performing, you know, why couldn't he go back to that previous position? So I agree with Rosa. I think it needs to be more discussion.
So I think maybe the way to resolve this is between Sarah, Chad, and I, if everybody's okay with this, we do a check of other medium-sized cities to say, okay, what do you have? And get a feel for what's there and how that works. Because, you know, I'm sure the other HR directors are going to give pretty good idea as to how this has worked or not worked, and whether it's Middleton or Sun Prairie or, you know, other Sheboygan. You know, I'm starting to get where they're a little bit bigger population, but somebody who's a little more comparable to, you know, 25, 30,000.
Yeah, and Jim, the only reason we would want them to go back to their former position is maybe they were phenomenal as a sergeant, but for whatever reason, then when they went to lieutenant, it didn't work out. Or maybe they're a police officer, they're a phenomenal police officer, then they get promoted to sergeant, and they realize this is just not my cup of tea, I don't like supervising people. So it's not like we want to lose them entirely. We want to keep them on staff, so that's why the bumping would be beneficial in that. Now, if they did something misconduct and they weren't a good officer or a good sergeant, we would go a different route with that. But that's the way I'm looking at it.
So, go ahead, Rosa.
Well, since you guys are gonna look into that, what would be helpful for me would be to see a pro and cons of having a a probationary period for those positions. Then that probably will help me feel more comfortable deciding one way or the other.
Again, I think between the three of us, we could write that up, and then people could weigh in.
And then I know you mentioned that this is about 8 years ago, the city had it. And then maybe with Act 10, they changed or something?
That's my suspicion, is that
Okay,
that's when that changed.
I know it's historical, but it would be interesting to know why it changed.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got that on my to-do to find out.
And another thing that you might want to consider too, if you want to have the latitude of having a probationary period, understanding that you're not voting on it today, maybe you say may with unanimous decree of the Police and Fire Commission. That way, any one of you can disagree with a probationary period and it wouldn't exist.
We should look at all the potential. I think we can get the information from the other communities. Because normally it's just the majority of the commission that makes the, decision when we vote on something, so. Okay, are there other things that people want to make sure get looked at as we get this to the, the attorney, as you guys research, what you want to have on the process for the complaint form and whatnot, so that's all clarified. Okay. If not, then I think that's it for,
So can I just,
Right,
I
go
just
ahead.
want to make sure I want to make sure I understand what we're doing between meetings. So we're clarifying the complaint form and the complaint process really.
right,
To help the public and help people understand, and us understand exactly what the avenue is that people have. And then you guys are going to actually talk about the promotion and, and whether or not we need a probationary period for that. And what that looks like, positive and negative, not just comparing to other municipalities, but what the pros and cons are like, because I would be interested in that as well. And then the last thing is we are going to pass this off to legal at this point and have them do a run-through.
I think we want to at least get that information, then give it to legal, and hopefully legal can have it to us, because we're going to be reacting to all this at our next meeting. And then from there, hopefully taking it out to, I assume that you have the union, both fire and chief and police plugged in so they can look at it.
Well,
Comment
and that's, how would you take it out to the public? Do you have an idea of?
Well, you just say at this next meeting, you public notice, you say that we're going to review the rules if people want to comment, but I think you also might send it out to, I would want to make sure whoever the union people are, that they've seen it. Hey, here are the PFCs.
I think once it's available to the public, you make it available to the unions and they can make comment.
You make it all available to them all at the same
Yep.
time.
Yep.
And Jeff, I'm just going to be working with Rosa and Tom on the language for the complaint process, just making sure we have all of that in there to match what we had talked about today. But then between Thorson and Chad and I will reach out to municipalities to get the probation, just what others are doing. And then we'll bring that back to the whole committee to talk about next time.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Anything else? If not, I think that takes us to the end of the agenda. One, I guess, kind of save announcements at the end. I will be at the next meeting, but I might have to call in if it's great that we can do this. I'd like to do it, but I'm going to have hip surgery only a couple days before. So I don't know if that's something. Yeah, so.
Oh, what was that?
But who knows? I can get a walker maybe. And
What's a bad joint like that doing to a good guy like you?
I ran too many Sutton eyes. That's the issue. I used to run it every year, and I ran all kinds of marathons, and I think I'm paying for it now. So, if not, thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I have an announcement.
Okay.
The good news is I'm moving forward with research on my thesis. I've been reaching out to Jim as far as establishing a focus group at this point. I mean, this has been a work in progress for a year plus. We're pretty proud of the fact that there's been some expressed interest on the work that we are going to do as far as recruiting a representative workforce and how we can go about that to establish best practices and basically giving us some idea of what the priorities are, not only from an employment standpoint, but from the community standpoint. So those are the next steps there, and we hope to have that, at least the first focus group done shortly here.
Okay, well, thank you for that info. Anyone else? If not, is there a motion to adjourn? Okay, second?
I second.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Okay, thank you, everyone. Stay safe. Is there